Bum ba da da dee da da dee da 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 dum. Bum ba dee da da ba da da ba dum. Bum ba da dee da da dee da da dum. Bum ba da dee da ba da da dum.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to this edition of the Tuesday Telecast, where we have a panel of experts and misfits on the stage ready to talk about the power of story. And I'm so happy to have this group here. And actually, everybody on this stage is a member of the octopus movement, which is kind of interesting. And the octopus movement is also talking about interesting things right now in Davos, Switzerland, where the World Economic Forum is going on. And I know that Dr. Maureen Dunn and Mark Pfister at least are there talking about how neurodiversity can solve a lot of problems in the world. So, but we're here to kind of talk about the problems in the world and the stories they come from. So, welcome. We have Dr. Janice Campbell, we have Jennifer Fiedler, we have Carrie Court. We have people, expats from the film industry, expats from the stage, expats from the musical stage. Everybody here is coming from a place of having put stories out there purposefully. And everybody here has an idea that we tell ourselves an awful lot of stories. So I'm going to open up the floor and say, hey, since your name starts with a C, Carrie, let's start with you and have you just give a brief introduction and why this subject interests you.
Yeah, well, this is my life. It's telling stories. I'm a screenwriter and a director, and a recognizer, becoming aware of the fact that I told myself all kinds of stuff throughout my life that I never questioned. Um, Except for when I questioned it, I had no answers. And so I chose to do things that were not great for me. And that helped further the awareness that we are just storytelling machines, we just talk to ourselves all day long. And that conversation can be flipped. We can write whatever story we want. I view life like a movie, so I don't know what's happening next. I don't know what any of you are going to say. I don't know where that's going to lead me. And if I stay there, I'm okay because I'm not gripping on to some tale that I have to know what you're going to say or that it has to fit in my little box of a head and match the story that I want to grab onto and justify. Well, that's me.
Hmm. I love that. Yeah, that questioning thing is huge. Janice, you're the next in the alphabetical order. Give us your beautiful voice.
Well, my entire life has been defined, facilitated, expanded by story. I come from a very large Southern family, and in the words of one of my cousins, didn't matter what you did or where you came from. It was whether or not you could keep up at the dinner table with all the stories flying around on the conversations. Um, a career for 15 years as a theatrical stage manager, putting stories live on stage. Um, I transitioned to becoming an acupuncturist, and now I also do online work that I call distance mind-body integration, and all of it is about stories. And people are like, how is acupuncture about stories? It's the stories that we tell ourselves, our body tries to carry. And when we don't tell stories big enough to live in, then we create tension and digestive upset and all manner of quote unquote stress related illnesses and discomforts that a lot of it comes back to the stories that we tell. And a lot of the work that I do is helping people realize that nearly every culture in the world acknowledges that the heart is the center of who we are. And our heart will never tell us anything bad about ourselves and will never direct us towards things that aren't good for us. Our brain, on the other hand, is a whole nother conversation. It's the high-paid legal assistant, I like to say. And it makes up stories that put us in boxes and limit what we can do and causes distress because it's not reporting to the CEO in our chest. So really, all of the work I've ever done is helping people tell stories big enough for them to live in and stories big enough for all of us to live in together.
Yeah. Yeah. This is all extremely relatable. Jennifer, it is your turn. You're the next contestant on the Tuesday Telecast.
Woohoo! Most similarly to Carrie, I have a long history working in the motion picture industry in Los Angeles. I, rather than an expat, refer to myself as a refugee. And all of us have in common this idea of stories and what we tell and the ramifications and consequences of them. And as with so many things in life, all roads lead to Rome. We're all saying the same thing using different language. Hey, good morning, Gail. Thank you. So I worked as an assistant director. My job was to schedule the film and manage the movie, run the set, manage the movie. And I remember speaking to someone. I started burning out, and I was talking to someone who was a little further along the enlightenment curve than I was at the time. And I remember her saying to me, yeah, but you're so much more than an AD. And that really rattled me because I didn't realize I was defining myself by what I did for a living. And so I dropped out of the film business and ran away from movies. And I now work as a confidence coach and deal with women with issues who devalue themselves, basically unworthy and lacking in confidence. And so, germane to what both Janice and Carrie have said, and what I just said, we are not consciously aware of the fact that we're telling ourselves a story. Like, I didn't think I was anything other than what I did for a living. And Janice heals this, the relationship of that story and what your body does with that story. And Carrie and I more deal in a different realm of that story and being authentic enough to find a different story and tell that, one that more clearly defines who and what you are. And my thing is kind of helping people understand that they're actually doing that. And in my parlance, that's existing in an invisible feedback loop where we just keep doing the same shit over and over and over and over and over, and we're unconscious of that. And so, yes, we all have pretty much the same thing to say in a different way. And I just wanted to add that one of the things that's viable and very relevant to this is Carrie's comment that I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know what you guys are going to say. I don't, and that I really want to underscore because you don't need to know. I don't need to know what anybody's going to say. I don't need to be reading a script. And until we accord ourselves the value and allied to that, relinquish our concerns about what will other people think, that's how who we really are comes out. and it doesn't matter that we don't know what we're going to say or who's going to react or whatever. We can do that with the confidence, knowing that it'll be an amazing conversation. So yeah, that's me, John.
Beautiful. Yeah, and then there's me, which who many of you know, but I can't assume that you do, because there could be new people here. So welcome to the show. If this is your first time, let us know in the comments, and go ahead and participate in the comments, because we'd love to see what you have to say. So I'm Lydia, and I have not been being a refugee entirely from the stage, but I've spent a lot of time on stage as a musician and telling a story through music, and also a writer. I compose, and I write a lot of prose that goes into those pieces of music. And what I like to say that I've done in that, and that I continue to do with my life, is to create environments and create atmospheres. Well, the thing is, we're all doing that all the time, but we're doing the atmosphere that, if you're connected to your heart, like Janice said, you're going for something that is probably a little more aspirational and a little more nurturing. And if you're in your head, then you're probably going for something that's more safe and more reactionary. Whatever we're doing, the idea that, yeah, we can affect that, and that's where I am now in my life, through these conversations and through the work that I do with grounding people, leading them to calm, so that they have some space between their thoughts and can actually not react, but sit back and observe. The thing that I've noticed is that we have a tendency, and this is inherent, this is biological, to justify what's going on in our heads, justify that belief. And the justification, even if everything around us is fighting with it, and doing all sorts of things, we will make it so. And we can make it so in a way that's progressive and that helps us. But we can also just make it so by that cognitive dissonance will go into our bodies, be stored, and be something that causes us pain and distress, and suddenly we don't know why. And suddenly those stories, and this is this is the name of this episode, stories that bind us and stories that free us. So we have a lot of stories, and we get them right from the time we're born. So I just want to acknowledge that. Hello, John Reed, and Unisa is missing from the conversation. We hope that he'll join us soon. I want to ask everyone, what do you think are the first stories that you ever came across? Or if you can't remember that far back, and you have children, like the first stories that your children came across that ended up being not true, and just really just that first moment of, this isn't true. And I'm not talking just Santa Claus here. We're born into something that really brings that we try to resonate with, and sometimes we can't.
I've got one. Of course, when you started that question, I leapt immediately to the first story that broadened my worldview, and then you're like, one that wasn't true, and I'm like, okay, what's that? And I think the one that leaps to mind best is, I'm the youngest of 6 children, and I'm 12 years behind my closest sibling. So she got to be the baby for 12 years. And she was my mom's type of little girl. She liked flowers, and she took ballet lessons, and she was super girly. And then I show up, and my favorite thing is overalls, and I'm not all that attached to whether I'm a girl or not. And I remember my mother telling me, I must have been 2 or 3 years old, and she said, well, when Jennifer was a little girl, all I had to do was tell her that she wasn't acting like a little lady, and she'd straighten right up, implying, of course, that this was going to somehow affect my behavior. And I was like, and this has to do with me how? I mean, I didn't say it that way when I was 3, but it was like, interesting tidbit about my sister. Now, I'm going to go back to what I was doing.
Thanks for that tidbit.
Yeah, thanks for that insight into her. That makes perfect sense. So I think that's probably my earliest memory of not true, or at least not true for me. Absolutely true for my sister, not true for me.
Nice.
Yeah. Jennifer.
I have one that's pretty seminal, but I was like 7 when it happened. But I played the piano as a child, and I was in you and Carrie, Lydia and Carrie have heard this story. I don't know if Janice has, but so I was in a piano recital, right, and did my piece, got off the stage, and at that time in the world at a piano recital, all your family comes, and there's flowers, and it's like a big deal, and it's a lot of pressure for a kid. You're on stage and there's an audience and like whatever. So I finished my thing and went to sit with my family, and this boy got up on stage and he butchered what he was playing. I mean, butchered it. And I had such trepidation about, oh my God, what's going to happen to him? The people are gonna like laugh, and the piano teacher's gonna kick his ass, and I was just beside myself with trepidation. And something made me look up, and I clocked that all the grown-ups in the audience, without exception, were all leaning forward. They were all non-verbally expressing support. They were all leaning forward, many of them like this, like, come on, you can do it. Not like, come on, get off the stage. But this was tangible. This was palpable, this vibe of support. And it blew my mind, because that never occurred to me. My story was, you mess up, you get punished, or you don't perform, that's a bad thing, right? And it never in a million years occurred to me that there was a different way of dealing with that. So that was quite seminal for me, opening into how that's another part of our story, like worst case scenario, right? Like, oh my God, I messed up. And what are people going to think? And my response is, who cares what people think? But germane to this story, people don't think what you're thinking. So it's safe to not think that.
Right. Yeah. So much of the old stories don't end up resonating now because they're coming from this place of survival and fear and judgment, and are actually kind of egotistical, because we think we know that we're going to be, fried on a stick, and and that's really not what's going to happen. Although we can make it happen.
Egocentric. Total. Well, kids are egocentric, right?
And that's okay. This is we have to go through this story at some point. Carrie, do you have any?
Yeah, I have. I have a treasure trove, but I'll stick to one. Well, growing up, I had a very erratic childhood, and it just hit me while everyone was sharing theirs, this story that I'd completely forgotten. But I grew up in a suburban Los Angeles neighborhood, somehow my father decided we should have horses. We had a backyard big enough for that, and it was legal. I was very young, 5, 6, 7. I don't recall exactly. And like there was this nature of just this limitlessness my father gave us, acted on, and yet we had to do it in a special way that was okay for him. And I just could not fit in that box. Like I loved the limitlessness. That's my nature, right? Curiosity is from the start, and I've been questioning that. And I want something happened with a wood corral that fell over and a nail was exposed. And as a kid, I was running around and stepped on the nail, which was very long and went through my foot between bones, luckily. And I could actually, it didn't pierce my top part of my foot, but the bump was there and I could see it. And my father was a doctor. So I was, and probably in my nature, that didn't bother me one bit. But what bothered me was that my father came, he tended to the wound, at the same time was very upset with me that I somehow was being a kid and stepped on a nail that that came out of this weird life we lived, which is we had these horses in a neighborhood where like no one else had horses. Across the way, people had horses, but it wasn't like and and it was odd to me. And I said to my father, why why don't I fit in? Like I can't fit in that. I fit perfectly in this limitless box, and I was so adventurous, and I'd get on my little pony and it would take me out and it would throw me invariably, and I'd walk home and it would run home, and none of that bothered me. I understood this was life, like I was grabbing life, and my father was teaching us to grab life. He kind of lived that way, but so filled with ego that then when something went wrong, there's a problem with a limitless story. But if something's limitless, you can't have any limits. You can't have a perfect way to do limitlessness. It just is happening. And I was so in tune to that, so very in tune to that. And none of my siblings were, and I guess could not understand how there could be a box around all this, and how I didn't fit in, and how my role model was half and half, half limitless and half just full of all these rules and perfection that had to be, and that classic, what's outside the house is not what's inside the house. And and yet the courage to be an oddball. He's a respected MD and in a town where, a little suburban town that everyone looked up to, but he had horses and he took us here and we did all these crazy things, and I never had to go to school. He'd write me a note if I didn't want to go. Like all that stuff, but then there was like a perfect way to do it, and I couldn't sit in that. Like it just I have always been curious and questioning, so I did question that. I would say, why in the hell is it this way? You know, I don't feel right. I'm a little kid who doesn't feel right because it's this way. And of course that was, then I would get punished because I just didn't fit the mold, and I didn't, have a sense of truth, of heart truth, like Janice said. Like my heart was telling me one thing, and then everything going around in this story was something else, except for I also got to feel my heart. So, you when you do limitless stuff, you feel your heart. You're working from that zone, right? So when you're living in that and you do that, it's that duality, that split that ego causes, that there's, that was just rife in that situation. And in my upbringing, I just could never put my head around it, just, and that, yeah.
There's so much in that limitless attitude and that limitless model. I'm reading John Reed said one of his early memories is of his dad making him leave school at 15. So sometimes there are these, when we're young, there are these outside things that doesn't matter whether we think we're limitless or not. We may have constraints, like school is where I can thrive, and it's been taken away, and all of a sudden that story that we're in just goes poof. But our brain doesn't like to let go of that. It sticks with it. It really sticks with it. And luckily for John, the idea that he enjoyed the school and got to it later. But what this dichotomy between limitless and boxed is a really interesting one to me. I have observed that between two parents as well, and in my life, it was just all sorts of stories, and just questioning the stories, realizing that I remember in middle school, this is a very kind of inconsequential story, but I was put into the talented and gifted program, right? This was a very short-lived thing, I think, but and we were given other things to do. And first of all, it's like, oh, this person is intellectually curious, we'll give her newspapers. And so I was stuck out by myself with all these newspapers, and the smell of the newspapers was overwhelming me. I'm like, I don't want to be talented and gifted. And these are just stories that are perceptions, and we go along in our role, whatever our role is. My role then was a student, right? And then I was in the bathroom, and people were smoking, and some teacher came and said, oh, you're all going to the office. And I got sent to the office, and the principal looked at me and said, get out of here, because I wouldn't have been one of the ones smoking. And I'm like, well, what makes me such an intellectual goody two-shoes, and what can I get away with because you don't know what I can do? So, anyway, Jennifer, you look like you're wanting to say something.
I wanted to bring up something all of us have in common, well, humanity, but the four of us here specifically, is this concept of limitlessness and rules. And my dad was an artist, the limitless one, and my mother was a woman who ran a house where you could eat off the floor in front of a toilet and bleached wood spoons. I mean, and Janice and I have talked about some aspect of that in her upbringing, and you highlight this. So, the thing, people of any age, there's a model where kids are social currency for their parents, and it's not about the kids, it's about the parents, right? And my daughter, I Like You, was one of those gifted, set aside. And so as a child, you don't, all you're trying to do is please and do the right thing and do well and please people, and at the same time explore and have fun and get thrown from the pony and fall out of trees and like whatever it is that we're doing. But this speaks to kind of, I think, what kind of inures us to oblivion to the story we're living in, is that a lot of it comes from our parents, and we don't as children, needless to say, we don't know what the words social currency mean. And as children, we revere our parents. But then we get to a certain age where that all flips back on us. And in my world of devaluation and unworthiness and lacking in confidence, and it's okay to like get real with that, and it involves introspection of right, as Valerie writes, someone else's reality is not our reality. So that's our parents' reality that in effect has little or nothing to do with us. It's all about them. And so to be able to take a step back from that and perceive that more realistically is not something available to a child, but as we grow and mature, that is available to us. And we so often, we have the power to choose that, and we have the power to regard that worldview and separate ourselves from it and forge our own, whilst at the same time still holding our parents with love and admiration and respect and keep them in our hearts. But that's not on me. That's my mother's deal. I don't bleach wooden spoons in my house, and I don't have to. So there's that element of limitless of like, how do you keep all that in the same container? Your limitlessness and what was imposed on you that you're still kind of not really thinking about or considering, or but it was my parents, and so yeah, interesting.
And the sense of I'd add a third thing, which is our need to belong, our need to connect even more than that. Like, we are born belonging, but we don't necessarily know that. After a short while, we're shown that, oh, so and so's better, or this box we're not quite fitting in, we're really uncomfortable in this box. Whatever it is, we think we need to belong. But the biggest thing about those boxes is that we're saying, I'm just trying to connect, man. I just want to know that I'm part of this tribe and be a vital part of this tribe. It's that intrinsic need to live, because that's what we're here for.
I think there's another option in this, between the rules and the imposed rules or structure and limitlessness, in that for me, it was about picking the things that I wanted to keep from that structure, from that upbringing, from that. It was creating my own toolbox, my own set of crayons of how I was going to do things. So there are things there's little pieces of structure or little pieces of limitlessness that I collect from every interaction I have, every relationship I have. And for me, it's more because that's more of an expansive story, right? And the challenge is not thinking everybody else is picking the same pieces, and the thing that you absolutely think no one works, no one should touch, no one, it's not a good idea for anybody, might be the thing that actually gives someone security, or might give someone a sense of adventure, or and it's when I think the thing is when stories bump up against each other that cause that are stories that don't allow for that permeability of your own membrane, so to speak, and also for that this is where I stop and this is where the rest, that doesn't allow for other people to have that same permeability or that same set of boundaries, depending on how they bump. I think that's where we end up in conflict and othering and unnecessary disagreement and judgmentalness and all these other things, is by not allowing other people to be as fluid as we want to be, or not allowing ourselves to be fluid in the face of other people being fluid in a different way, and or other people needing more structure, or other people, everybody's got a different set of crayons, and some people may not even use crayons. They may use sound, they may use it could be anything. They can make bread instead of coloring. And so I think there's something to be said. The discussion of the opposition between structure and limitlessness is valid for the concepts that it brings up, but I think we have to be careful not to create a situation where it creates opposition that unnecessarily
create barriers that are not inherent, but that are part of the story.
Right.
And this, you're kind of speaking to Denise asked this question: when you're telling stories, how do you ensure if the mind you live in is the true reality if the story involves divergent people? And yeah, you're very much speaking to that kind of idea.
What I tell my patients and my clients is, and what I coach them in, is getting their body's take on it. Because before we started to learn to talk, our whole being was responding to the world. Our whole body was hungry, our whole body was angry, our whole body was curious, our whole body was in pain. Even if it was just a stump toe, all of us was involved in the stump toe. And as we grow up, we start acting. All of you have heard me say this. As we get older, we start thinking that everything from our neck down is here to carry our head and our hands around, and then we wonder why that causes some chaos. But if we check into the way our body responds to a situation before we go into the language in our head, then we can address, my body has gone into fight or flight, or it's feeling under threat, or I'm holding tension in my stomach. Is it a snake, or is it a hose? And it's a snake. Okay, what options do I have to remove myself from the premises? Unless you like snakes. No offense to snakes. And or is it, if it's the hose, and so then now that I can release the tension in my stomach because it's a hose, it's not a snake. Or is it is my body reacting as though this was a situation that I was in before? Am I reacting to this interaction because this reminds me of that person I used to date that was so awful, that stole everything out of my bank account before they left, or whatever? Why, am I superimposing a story from somewhere else onto somebody else? And if so, then how do I release it in my body? And that's, I've found in the work that I do, that when people release the physical response, it pulls the rest of it with it. It pulls you'll see it in some indigenous practices like cord cutting, where people, the way I learned of cord cutting was through a Hawaiian tradition, but by releasing the physical sensation, it releases the story in a way that our brains may have talked about it a lot and rationally know that it doesn't be there, and then we still get that tightness in our chest. And if we learn how to open it up physically, it changes. Anyway, I'm on my soapbox. I'll get off now.
But you bring up this amazing, truth. What is truth? It's what we believe, right? But this inherent wisdom, this sourceful wisdom that everybody has, whether you acknowledge it or not, that you're breathing. And you are not thinking about that. Yes, you can. You can say, I can box breathe. I can hold my breath for 4 counts and then breathe out for 4 counts and put our breath in a box too. And we sorry. I do deal a lot with breathing, so I can lightly chide. Anyway, but that's inherent wisdom. That is something that we are not asking ourselves to do. We start doing it. And the systems in our bodies, which are taking care of us, there's more nerve endings down in our gut than there are at all in our brain. And this is actually really vital information. This is all parts of ourselves that we're just ignoring that are kind of awesome, like in the true sense of awesome. Like this is awe-inspiring stuff. So thank you for bringing that up, Janice. It's really, really incredibly vital. Uh, any other thoughts on this particular vein?
I have some thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that. I love Janice and the body. And for me, um, when you tie this to story, it's about not knowing. You know, your body does not need to have an answer. It just feels and alerts and does so many amazing things, right? So, but we're trapped in the tails of our head and an answer, and then we spin off into um, this mask that's created that our body does. It's odd to think that we also believe just that phrasing. I said the mask, right? That's your face, your head. That's not your body. It's not. We don't talk about being in a costume when we talk about, you know, presenting ourselves to the world. We call it a mask, you know, and that's not by mistake to the degree of that language can, you know, exemplify something. And I was just thinking a little bit back on Lydia's story because um, I actually had that exact same experience in middle school of being listed as gifted and sent to another room at some point during the day. And I walked in and they were doing hippie stuff for me. You know, it was the early '70s, and there was like some kind of hippie stuff with these teachers with long flowing, like they didn't look like the other teachers either. They had, you know, the whole hippie get up, and I was like, what the hell did they send me here for? Like, I I have no like I don't know what they're doing. They want me to do like it was a newspaper thing that you mentioned, but it was magazines and there was a little they had sitar music playing, all this stuff that's just so foreign to me, right? And I'm looking around the room going, I'm curious about it, but they're putting me in some other box. This is another box.
It's a very decorated box, but
Yeah, it was
it's a
like
box
this
nonetheless.
this this box, and I'm like, so, for 3 weeks when they sent me out, I sat outside that classroom until someone found me because I like, what the hell am I doing in here? Like, this is a like not that it was a waste of time, but just it made me othered. Like I was othered going into this thing that was supposed to be good for me,
Yeah.
and my so it's just that knowing, these boxes are about knowing.
Speaking of boxes,
Exactly. Yeah.
Leslie, you're Ryan.
I love Leslie. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing with it. It's not from the heart, it's a presentation. It's a presentation of something. And all that was a presentation to me that somehow being gifted meant that I like should just love all these things that we're not talking about in school and all this other stuff. And like it just reminded now it reminds me those kinds of things in the boxes that there's no chance for us to grasp this improbable, impossible in some ways. I mean, not possible, not impossible to do, but existence. Like there's no the what, and this gets to what Janice was saying. Our own perspective can be expanded beyond belief through the understanding that I only have my perspective. That's it. I don't have anybody else's perspective. And that perspective does not need to come with a bunch of boxes and labels and silos that put other people and myself in to justify my existence. Because my existence is happening whether I know it or not, you know? So
Absolutely.
know it. So know it. I exist in this infinite thing. It's beyond my comprehension. If you think of the edge of the universe, I mean, I can't even comprehend and don't want to try how vast the universe is, but there's an edge to it. Right? This there's nothing out there. There's just nothing. And so this nothingness is vital to feeling comfortable, and that nothingness resides in my body and then it works its way into my head.
And you can have awe without comprehending.
Right.
You can just have awe.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I sense you're describing right now.
Exactly. And that helps me take that to other people because I can have awe in what they do. Like Janice said, there's stuff I mean, I've done a lot of stuff, so the bad stuff. So I understand for me that's not good, but
Bad.
right, quote unquote bad, right? But well, it is bad in the sense that I was trying to hurt myself. So
Yeah.
and maybe I don't come back from that. You know, so in that way it's bad, but I don't know because each person's existence is whatever it is, but I look at it that way. But the thing about that is that but I can also understand there's a need, there's a story that was trying to fulfill.
Mm.
That story that there is no possible way for me to ever fit in to this story of my parents and the story of society and the story that I was gifted and I'm sent to some room that I had, my body was telling me I don't belong here, like this isn't for me or whatever because it's othering. So there's just all these things that are about limits, but we don't exist in limits. We exist in the most limitless thing there is in the world, this universe. I mean, the fact that there's an earth and that we're here and that all the couplings from how far ever you want to go back to where humanity started, 2 million, 3, whatever, I don't know. The science always changing, and which is great. But like, there's a bunch of couplings that got me here, but like a bunch, like an infinite. I could track them, but I don't need to because it's so vast that and so there's so much value for me in connecting to my body and then these understandings that come from that it's just improbable that I even exist, and there shouldn't be a way to make that justified.
You're speaking so much about something you and Jennifer brought up earlier, and that is authenticity. And you haven't even said it, but it's not about the presentation. And when we're not in that presentation and we're just in that space that you're in, that's just who we are, and it can change, but we're just being. And we're going to just be whether we like it or not. And if we don't like it, then we're going to fight against it, and we're just going to be, life is going to be awkward and achy and cranky. Jennifer, what were you going to say? Sorry to short.
It's all good. It's all good. My first direction was the conversation. This part of it started with you, Lydia, talking about our fear of not belonging and that we're born belonging. We all already belong. Then we moved on to Janice, who was talking about her crayons, about opposition, how what I value and what someone else values, and that creates conflict and opposition. And then we move on to Carrie with the story of Ravi Shankar in a classroom. And I had a very similar, I was on an exchange program in France. 14 kids, handpicked, special gifted children. And we spent 2 weeks in Paris, and then we were divided up. There were half the group went north to Limoges, and half the group went south to near Toulouse. And I was put with a family in Montpellier. And everybody else in my group, I came to find, were all in this like wealthy suburban enclave. And they were swimming in a swimming pool and playing tennis and riding horses and blah, blah, blah. And I was all alone with this family, with a guy who worked for the National Train Service, and the mother was a teacher, and whiny kids, and we never did anything. And I was miserable. And the woman running this thing, I guess, would call to check in on people. And I bitched. I was like, why am I being punished? I'm here all by myself. Everybody else is having a blast. What's going on? And of course, she said to me, oh, well, that's because you speak French better than any of them. And I'm like, yeah. And that was her answer. And so there was no respite. There was no, well, there was no discernible solution, if you will. And I got pissed off. So I took one of the kids' bikes and went to the train station and took the train to Toulouse. And I was 16, and I had been overseas at that point and was mature for my age and knew how to get around. I just bailed. So I went to Toulouse. I hung out all day. I spent the night there. And this French family, needless to say, were like in freak out mode, right? That I just like dematerialized. But I did what was authentically me, which was, fuck it, I'm out of here. And the woman whose best answer was some namby because you speak French better than anyone was ego operating of she didn't have anything better to say. Maybe she made a mistake. Maybe that's what she thought was suitable. So to wrap this all together, we all already belong. And it's our ego that drives us to fear what happens if we don't, which in turn keeps us from living authentically. And so that whole chain of disaster is averted when we understand that just because the voice in your head is the loudest voice in the room doesn't mean you have to listen to it, and that you're perfectly safe being who you are because you're always connected. And if you think about other people for just a heartbeat before you think about yourself, wonderful things happen.
I'd like to, I love that story because A, it's so very much you, Jennifer. And two, because it is, you took effective action. You were in a situation that you couldn't, that was not working for you, and you took effective action. And so many people forget that they can do that. But I did want to say one thing to Carrie's thing about this ability to not know, which I think is really important. None of us knew at some point, even the people that were in the know, there was some point where none of us knew that 9/11 was going to happen until it did. We also, none of us ever knew that we were going to fall in love before we did. We have a habit to tell the story of the horrible thing that will happen. We don't hold space for the possibly fantastic thing that will happen.
Totally.
And we are completely unaware of the fact that nothing may happen. It may not be 9/11, and we might not fall in love, and we might just have to go grocery shopping. And holding that space of let's see, let's wait and see, engenders curiosity, it engenders waiting in a very different way. Waiting and anticipating are two different things. And waiting to see what happens is so often interpreted as, I've researched the 16 things that may come back in it, and one of these things will happen, and now I need to find out if I have the right answer. As opposed to, who knows?
It's okay, though, also to have that other part of your personality that some of us have. I suspect, that Jennifer might relate to this, to not just wait and see what happens, but also don't wait. I got to get out of here. I'm going to do something. And for sure, that's also part of waiting and seeing what happens. And it's also, and you might nearly kill yourself. You might fall on your face. You might just be embarrassed, but whatever, something happens. So sometimes, there's also that impetus to make something happen because we're expressing something inside that isn't
Ready.
in the environment that we're in.
Oh, I didn't mean don't do anything.
Yeah. No,
what Jennifer did was, she didn't say, "Oh, if I get on this bike and run away, they're going to send a cop after me for the bike, or I'm going to, run it. All these horrible things can happen if I get on this bike." She was like, "Let's see what happens if I get on the bike." And so again, it's the same, being okay, taking action while being okay with not knowing how it's going to turn out is falls under that same umbrella for me.
That's the nail. It's okay to not know. And we don't know that it's not okay to not know, because we all live in a world where, and what's the answer? And what's the answer? The moon is made of cheese. Shut up, dude. Why can't you? I have no idea. That's my grandfather talking. Like, no matter what the question, he had an answer. And even as a kid, I was like, dude, you're so full of shit, man. And like, it's okay to not know. And if we become inured to that, which is relinquish this monkey death grip on controlling and knowing and what are people going to think, and I'm expected to know, none of that. All bets are off. It's okay to not know. It's okay to not be all wound up and worried, and it's okay, because if you're being inherently you will find a solution. You will, and if you're being censured, do something else. You don't have to live in that. You have a choice to not live in that. So it's so cool to not know, because anything can happen, right?
Yeah, it's again that egocentric place in us that knows that there's fear in the unknown. Who knows what's in the unknown. We don't have to know. There's every possibility is in the unknown. And we can also forget. I just want to, bring that up. And there's kind of a wonderful thing that happens sometimes when we forget. And that is that we can rediscover things that we loved with childlike delight. It's that act of when we are curious and when we're discovering, how can we be in that place of curiosity, in that place of awe, in that place of delight, instead of saying everything I've known is going up in flames and it makes no sense and I'm going to run and scream and blame and react and hide.
Because that's fun. Well, and isn't that fun? I mean, and that's a very divergent. I get a lot of blowback on this, but who knows? Something's going to happen. And when everything is all blowing up, the apocalyptic scenario, the personal apocalyptic scenario that people go through, why do you leap to the dark side? Oh my God, this is awful, instead of like, oh wow, it's a chance to reboot or start all over, or fall in love, or you know, like, and we always go to that place of death and destruction and oh my, and it's all fear, right? Ego, fear, and it doesn't have to be. It's just so much easier, you know. I don't know what's going to happen. Something's going to happen. Okay.
It's like the Taoist quote, "The barn's burnt down, so now I can see the moon."
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Who knew
Yeah.
we had a moon?
Yeah, right.
Who knows what's good and what's bad? There's not good and bad. There's movies, you know. It's just
Yeah.
movies that we're seeing. So,
And
hey, here
that's
comes the exciting part.
Yeah, and I
well,
was
and
thinking,
that's not to discount actual, you know, horrific acts that happen in the world, you know, and
Absolutely.
violence perpetrated and everything else. It's but if we put ourselves in a fight or flight situation when we see that, when it's not affecting us, when it's not, I mean, it may affect us as a member of humanity that had empathy, but if we put ourselves in a fight or flight situation, we are burning resources that we could use to put towards changing the situation.
Yeah.
And it's an unnecessary
Yeah.
use of chi.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's that connected source that you're talking about, and and how we are all connected. And while there's something that Carrie and I have talked about, this cultural momentum was showing us that, oh, these things are happening and they are awful, or they are on this side, or they are on that side, or we can actually put space between those thoughts, because there's plenty of space out there for all those thoughts to commingle, to float away, and we can find a solution. I love that. Yeah. Thank you.
yeah, that's beautiful. And I want to add, in that space, when you get there, your natural human creativity is allowed to kick in, and that may be the solution, or that may take you into some creative mode that puts you in nothingness, and you're fully absorbed, and you're actually being for whatever period of time that is, and that creates more space for you. And it doesn't mean you have to paint or write or whatever that's considered creative, but actually just that space of nothingness and doing something with that as your body signals you takes you into that creative space. And
Yeah.
and a lot of growth for me personally has happened in that space because I can't know from there. There's just no way to know anything.
To have that is so freeing, to not know, to say, not react to a problem, but to say, oh, what do I want? What's the quickest way to get there? And that's a unique process. Not how does somebody else say to get there, but creating your own way to get to the solution instead of fixing the problem, which is rife with all these expectations and all this knowing. We don't know. We are free to, fuck around and find out.
Yes.
I love this. So we should start wrapping it up. There's I want to talk about the winding. This is the meta title of this is Winding Roads. And so what's your final thought for the audience on how to use creativity and how to be aware of the story when the road turns on itself?
By not viewing the road as a straight line from point A to point B. The road is long and winding. That's not within your purview or not within your control. So the whole linearity of if I do this, I'll get there, and once I'm there, I'll get to here, to relinquish that idea and just travel the road and be cool with the fact that it's winding, understanding that you belong on the road and that's the windiness is inherently in the nature of the road.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I'll say, live your life like a movie, and there's never been a movie you've ever seen that you know what's coming next. If you think you know what's coming next, there's no reason to watch it. Like you just, and that road is winding, and things happen, and you're just a character in this play, and this play is unfolding in a way that if you hold on to some of the stuff that makes you have to justify why you're here, you miss what's coming forward. And that's what I say is like a movie, because we just don't know. We watch a movie and we watch these characters, and they're real people happening. Things are happening to them that are not within their control. And then we see how they react to that. So either way, whether you're reacting or you're sitting with it and opening and learning, things are going to come up on this road. They'll come up for you in 10 minutes. They're going to come up for me in 5 minutes. They're going to, and freeing yourself of actually having to justify that, and just rewrite your movie as you go from nothingness.
Mm. Mm.
And I guess I would say, if you run up against a internal or external story that is causing constraint in some way, emotional, physical, whatever, notice what happens in your body and where you're finding that constraint, and then do the thought experiment. Tell a completely different story about it. Tell the exact opposite about it. So and so didn't show up for coffee for me today because they really don't want to spend time with me, or so and so just ran it. They just got a winning lottery ticket and they're over there cashing it in, and I'll hear about it later. Tell a story that is completely opposite of the one that and notice what changes in your body, and use, maybe, you don't have to run with that story about the lottery ticket, but run with that opening that it gives you in your body and in your spirit that allows you to use your creativity to continue to wind through the road.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. You are inherently creative. You have inherent wisdom that's been in you all along. And when there is some turn that you don't know what's coming up, that's okay, because you're inherently creative. If you don't like your story, if your story includes you having a cranky back, a misbehaving kidney, or migraines, or worse, neglect, misfortune, change that story, man. Change that story. You got it. You are inherently creative. I want to thank you all for being on the show, and for all of you in the audience. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for sharing your appreciation. And thank you for sharing your humanity. If you have been here before and you haven't subscribed, please ever so gently push that subscribe button. And if you want to see more, also hit the like button. I appreciate you all, and I will see some of you around the block, and some of you next week on the Tuesday Telecast. Thanks for being here.
Bum ba da da dee da da dee da 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 da. Bum ba di da di da da ba da 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 ba dum. Bum ba da di da da di da 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 dum. Bum ba da di da da ba da 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 dum.